Panel: Scaling Accessibility for Sustained Impact. AliCamp. Gold sponsors ANZ, Intopia and Telstra. Silver sponsors Canva and Coles. Supporters Rumour, the design recruiter.
Well, we are going to hopefully have a little bit of an informal conversation about scaling accessibility in organizations. We've got three amazing people on this panel with us, each of them all having their wonderful challenges and successes and experiences around that space. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick this off. I'm going to throw it back to our panelists. I want each of them to give you probably just a minute or two background about yourself and your background and your experiences and what you bring to the table here for our amazing crowd. So, Gerry, I'm going to start way down on the far end and let's work back towards me. So, Gerry, why don't you kick us off from that perspective?
Okay, so as, what was your name again? Sarah, that's nice. Sarah. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Gerry Neustatl. It's the correct Austrian is Neustatl, but most people wouldn't worry about that. Yeah, very, very, very good. So accessibility, how did I get into all of this? A long history. But at the end of the day, the point was about making a real difference for all Australians. Can you get, what was the...
So just tell us a bit about your background.
My background.
We're setting why you're on this panel with us, Gerry.
Okay.
So what's your background?
Okay. I've looked at accessibility, digital accessibility, over the course of the last 15, 20 years in a range of different ways. And at the end of the day, now I work for the ABC. The ABC is about providing experiences for all Australians. So really what I bring to this panel is hopefully some sort of representation of that experience for all Australians from in the media environment. Yeah.
Gerry, thank you very much. Matthew, yourself as well. I know you've got a little bit of a storied history as well, so let everyone know about yourself.
So Matthew Brennan, I currently work at Atlassian as the accessibility tech lead. I was a former software engineer, and in around 2006, I was working for Yahoo as a front-end engineer. I had the opportunity to attend a front-end engineering summit where I saw Victor Saran, who is pretty well known in the accessibility industry, present what it was like to use a screen reader and navigate Yahoo's homepage. It blew me away. I had never seen someone use a screen reader like that before. And at that point in time, I realized that myself as a software engineer was part of the problem. It wasn't the technology. It wasn't the experience. It was the people writing the code that were creating the majority of the problems and making a hard time for folks. So from that point onward, I wanted to focus on accessibility. From that, got more involved into it, made the transition away from software engineering to program management, secured a job on the Amazon accessibility team over in Seattle. Spent a little bit of time there, helped sort of develop the program and a lot of the internal standards and tooling that was used there, and then transitioned to the Facebook accessibility team, where I was one of the program managers there, and then onto Instagram, and then I am now back home here in Australia working for Atlassian. So no longer writing code, but still have enough technical chops to be able to hang with the engineers, and now get to share my experience in working on some of like the biggest websites as well as like technical companies in the world, scaling accessibility, and share that at Atlassian.
Yeah. Thank you, Matthew. And Mel, last but definitely not least, a little bit about yourself.
Right. Well, I've been working at Coles in the accessibility team for about 8 years now, and I've driven the change that was Coles as a cautionary tale back a few years ago to becoming award-winning when it comes to accessibility for our website and our app. So really proud of that. And now I'm the accessibility manager, and my team's role is to make sure all of our digital products are inclusive and accessible for all Australians, because obviously shopping is a basic human need, and we want to ensure that our shopping experiences are accessible for everybody.
Excellent. So as you can all hear, we've got three wonderful individuals working with very large organizations in their own right, and all of them are progressing accessibly at different paces and speed. But that scaling it across such large organizations is a challenge. And it doesn't really matter, I think, sometimes if it's a small organization or a large organization, but that scaling of accessibility can be a bit of a challenge. So I might start with you, Mel. I mean, you alluded to the fact that there was an incident, and I know some in the room will probably know what
you can Google it
is. But that obviously sounds like it was one of those catalysts. But talk us through, like, for Coles, that scaling now of accessibility across Coles from that driving point. How's that sort of look like from a Coles perspective?
Are you talking about from the catalyst to where we are now?
Yeah, let's start from that catalyst point, because I think that I know accessibility was definitely an element within Coles, and it was very driven, but that catalyst definitely, I think, became a pretty big pivot movement for Coles. So how's that, combined with whatever else has been occurring within Coles, driven you to the point where, as you alluded to, you've been receiving awards for the work that Coles is doing? So you've gone from maybe a low point to a very high point.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So it started off with actually a customer complaint, and I'm a big fan of hearing feedback from customers and team members as well, so we can figure out where the problems are. So fortunately, this customer did complain about our website not being accessible for her when she was doing her shopping, and she's blind. So that led to us really delving into it and making sure that we made the right changes to make sure that going forward, our products and experiences were accessible. So it started off with the creation of a digital accessibility policy, and every time WCAG has upgraded to the next version, we've then looked at our policy and upgraded along side by side to make sure that it wasn't just you were pinged for not being accessible and then mic drop and then that was it. We've built on that year on year to make sure that we're thinking, what can we do better next time, speaking to customers, doing usability testing, and making sure that we're continuing to evolve as technology evolves as well.
And I'll pass on to Matthew. Now, Matthew, we've just had Pavel up here, and Pavel gave a really fascinating sort of experience from his perspective. I know you've worked with and named a couple large organizations. So if we were looking at maybe that catalyst again for either the Atlassian perspective or maybe one or two of those other organizations, what do you think that big catalyst was for trying to drive accessibility to be scaled across those organizations?
I think it's different at different stages of where the company's at. Initially at Atlassian, to use them as an example, it was about addressing customer feedback and getting a lot of complaints from customers about products not being accessible, problems they were having, not adhering to WCAG, things like that. So initially it started off as something to address that customer complaint. But then as we learned more about the problem, things became more apparent. It progressed into other things that then started to matter more to the company. You know, if it's not just about addressing customer feedback, how do we ensure that what we're releasing into production doesn't have these kinds of issues? How do we reduce bugs? How do we then start to scale accessibility out across the company to achieve our larger business goals? What part do they contribute towards that? So it's kind of evolved at Atlassian from just addressing customer feedback to trying to reduce bugs, to stop bugs, to now looking at things like how do we assist the company in increasing its market share for like enterprise and government customers by making sure that our products are hitting the bar of the requirements they have. You know, I've heard the European Accessibility Act mentioned here, but also in the US, things like Section 508, where, you know, VPAT documents, things like that are required as part of the procurement process. These are the things that matter to the company and help us scale, get investment, get resources and the time we need to achieve these things. So I wouldn't say it's one thing. I think it evolves as the company leans more into this space, understands more about the problems that are ahead of it, and then what becomes, you know, more important as the business also shifts what its goals and strategies are.
Gerry, what about yourself? Like ABC, was there a catalyst per se for scaling the accessibility effort that you've been driving over there?
Yeah, definitely. So when I started with the ABC, what is it now, nearly 10 years ago, I was brought on board specifically to look at audience-facing product. So when we talk about product, these are products that I'm sure many people are familiar with, everything from Triple J to ABC iView, ABC Listen, and really ABC TV and radio. And then there's the transition of these products through to the web. So I mentioned that really just to give context on what we're talking about. And we're talking about products that are used by most people. Most Australians have some touch or touch point with the ABC at some point through their lives, and for many people throughout their lives. So you'd think that we'd get a lot of audience feedback, and we do. Do we get a lot of complaint from people with lived experience of disability? Actually, you'd be surprised. We actually don't get that much. It's not to say it doesn't exist, and I can promise you that audience feedback that we receive, especially criticism, is acted upon. It's a great way to make change. To your point, Mel. We don't really get a whole lot of feedback. As you mentioned with your experience with Atlassian, you're really talking about the B2B experience rather than the B2C, so business to business rather than business direct to customer or business to audience, I suppose. So what were the drivers for us? Basically, the primary driver really was lack of effectiveness. So when I first joined the ABC, as I started with 10 years ago, a little under 10 years ago, I brought the habits and the processes with me from my previous experience, I didn't mention before, with Vision Australia. I was doing a lot of audits. I came on board and I started smashing audits with Triple J, with all the sorts of sites and apps and that sort of thing that I mentioned before. They ended up going into this huge backlog in Jira, never to see the light of day again. It was like a big black hole, and all these issues that I'd record would go into there, and I'm thinking, yay, this is great. I've recorded thousands and thousands of issues. Fantastic. Did they get done? Did they get seen? No, they didn't, but they made me feel good. To Pavel's point before, same experience as he had, where it made me feel wonderful that I was doing all of this fantastic change. But was it effective? Was it making a difference? Not really. Sometimes some issues would get fixed, but not a lot. So started thinking, how can we do things differently? And this is when we started with the shift left mentality, where we started thinking about accessibility as early as possible at the design stage, or even before the design stage, as soon as we can. And that is what has driven fundamental change at ABC.
Excellent. So it's interesting. We've got different catalysts and we've got different drivers that have been coming across from all three of you. There's a big thing that usually happens in most organizations, which is around governance. Like it's great. We can have all these amazing policies in place, encouragement. But as you've all heard, it's like each of you have had some of these catalysts through a complaint at some point in the past. And how do we sort of get organizations to continue to do the right thing or to enforce the right thing internally? So what type of governance arrangements are sort of in place or you've seen work successfully within your organizations? And might start with you, Matthew, in the middle. From your perspective, like, is governance, I guess, maybe important? And if it is, what does that look like for you?
It's definitely important. For me, it's about accountability. Do we know what we've got to do? Are we holding ourselves to the bar that we're trying to set here? If we take, again, Atlassian as an example, this is a continual work in progress. Nothing is really set in stone. It's a constant evolving thing. But one example I can share is that we've implemented like an accessibility bug SLO. So we now have dedicated resolution windows for accessibility issues, which give us confidence that we can then communicate to customers that when issues are raised, we can now provide somewhat accurate timelines around when they can expect those things to be fixed. This is one example of something that was missing for the longest time. Customers would raise complaints. We would say, yep, got it logged, it's in the backlog, watch this space. And watching this space could be years. I once found an issue on the public the public Jira backlog that was make websites WCAG compliant that was filed in 2009, and not a lot was done about it. So that's an example of when we could just say, yep, thanks, we've got the issue, but we can't really give you any insight as to when it will be fixed or any transparency in the process of what is taking place with that bug. So I think it's about holding yourselves accountable, creating open and transparent processes for customers to be able to see or users to be able to see what you're doing to maintain the bar that you're setting, and then doing all the regular stuff that you have internally, like policies around what it means to be accessible, internal standards that you need to follow, putting all the interventions and mechanisms in place to like enforce those quality controls as well. But I think it's just a continual evolution. Like, this work is really never done. I don't think you can come up with it and say it's set and forget and that's it. Things are constantly changing. Businesses change direction, priorities, stuff like that. So I think you have to be a little fluid in this space. Again, at Atlassian, this is a work in progress. We haven't got all the things in place, but we're definitely making progress in the right direction to having that accountability and that governance at scale, where everybody knows what's got to happen from different roles through to teams, through to orgs. But again, this is something that you just got to chip away at over time.
So you're suggesting that you're on a journey.
Yes.
I know there's a person in this room that loves that word so much that she doesn't cringe. Gerry, I'm going to throw over to you. So governance, I guess, do you view governance as an important aspect at the ABC? And what does that maybe look like at the ABC if it is?
Yeah, again, it's very important. To Matt's point, he was talking about different levels of governance. There's like an organizational level of governance, and then there's a team level. Yeah, we find the same thing works for us. So we do have an organizational level, which we're quite transparent about. We have our various plans, which are publicly available. We have our corporate plan, our 5-year plan, which is coming to an end, and then there'll be, I imagine, another one that will come afterwards, where the leadership team are explaining what to expect of the ABC over that period. We also have a disability inclusion and belonging plan, which talks about the way that what disability and inclusion and belonging means to the organisation. And this is not just what we deliver to audiences, but the workplace that we want to be, and the accessibility of that workplace for staff. So that's very much at the enterprise level. And how does that ladder down? We have working groups that look to deliver to some of these plans, such as the disability inclusion and belonging plan. Now, there have been various aspects of that plan that have worked, and there are some aspects that have not worked so well. Again, to Matt's point, plans need to be evolving and maturing, and the ABC will release its disability action plan soon. So, and again, that will be a public document where we will broadly say to Australians, this is the way that the enterprise, that your ABC views disability and what that means for audiences and for its staff. Excuse me. Then below that enterprise level, there's the team level. What does governance at the team level look like? I was wondering if that was me. So what does it look like at the team level? Most importantly, what's effective to your first question? What's actually effectively going to work? What sort of governance is required? One of the things that we wanted to make sure about is that, certainly in terms of product, when we're working on the product, the maturity of the product and the evolution of the product, such as ABC News, we're constantly evolving the product. So how are we going to make sure that everything is released to the audience in a way that is optimized for accessibility? Well, we need to make sure that the team is taking on that shift left mentality. And so we clearly defined as a designer, these are your responsibilities when it comes to accessibility. And these are all captured in guides that are available and distributed through our SharePoint site. As a developer, these are your responsibilities. As a tester, these are your responsibilities. And most importantly, at the top of that chain, as a product manager, you own the product. This is your product. So these are your responsibilities. And by defining those, by providing that guidance all the way through, we help the organisation achieve that. We do a similar sort of thing with procurement, where Heron's here somewhere. She gave a great talk on procurement before. Heron and I had a chat some time ago about their accessibility threshold assessment, which I really love that approach, and have adopted it in full. So we now require our technology people, when they're looking at a piece of technology, when they're looking to buy something, that the first thing they need to do is complete that accessibility threshold assessment. Is accessibility going to be required for this procurement? If it is, then these are the steps to follow. If it's not, which doesn't happen very often for technology procurements, these are the steps to follow. So to answer your question, we have various levels of governance throughout the organisation to achieve the best accessible outcomes.
Thank you. And Mel, last but not least again on this one, curious, so what is sort of maybe some of the governance style arrangements you've implemented at Coles, and that might be similar or different to what we've already been hearing from Matt and Gerry so far?
Well, I'll start by saying governance is pretty boring. So we're talking about policies, procedures, checks and controls and monitors, which, isn't the funnest and most interesting of topics. And Sarah mentioned before about having a policy and then it sits in a shelf somewhere. And then Heron also mentioned about having the paper tiger with no teeth, and that both of those examples are really real, because if you're not enforcing and you're not sharing and telling people what the policies and procedures are, and people aren't living them, they're just kind of a waste of time. It's a nice to have, but it's at the end of the day, it's the people that actually enforce it, live it, do it until it becomes a norm, which it kind of has for us, which is really great. So people are saying it for us. I'm not the only lone voice in my team saying, did you know we've got an accessibility policy? At Coles, we've got about, 30-something, a company of that size. We have so many policies. So it's very easy for people not to be aware, especially new people and new teams that come along. So it's up to us to make sure that it's normalised and shared and communicated, and understood why people need to do those processes and procedures, and also checking back, making sure that they're working, because, we don't want to maintain status quo and just hope to God that it's working, 5-10 years later. We've got to make sure that it's still relevant today, and that the checks and balances and the monitors and controls we have in place are adjusted as the business grows and changes in structure over the years.
Okay, so I'm hearing a common theme from all three of you, that there's a little bit of trial and error consistently going on within your organizations to try to find what works. And as we know with trial and error, sometimes things don't work from the trial and error process. I'm going to throw this one open to all three of you. Someone can jump in first, but I'd be curious, and I think we'd all be curious, give one example of something you tried that didn't work, and maybe one that really ended up being very successful, because I think every organization is different. So there's what might work for one organization may not work for a different organization. But I think people would be curious to know what maybe didn't work for your organization, and maybe one thing that did really work for your organization. So does someone want to jump in on that one, or are we just going to be this really embarrassing sort of quietness come from this?
I've got an example. So at Atlassian, the original approach was that whatever testing takes place or customers raise bugs, those bugs would end up on that team's own backlog to address at whatever time they saw fit. That clearly didn't work well in trying to understand the accessibility health of our products, the status teams are at, the work they were doing, what they needed to do, whether they were doing the right things. And so we set about changing that by creating a central accessibility backlog. so that we could implement dedicated practices and processes just for accessibility issues. So they were not treated the same as regular UI issues or other things that teams could kind of pick and choose to do. Instead, by bringing a certain level of control to that backlog, we could then implement those practices and processes and ensure that teams were prioritizing the right kinds of issues, were impacted by the severity of them, how it contributed towards conformance or compliance. It opened up pathways for better integration for automated tooling and reporting into existing processes. And so that's something that is now been working really well, that teams know that accessibility issues exist on the central backlog. Our SLOs or our SLAs are attached to that. It's very rare that you will find accessibility issues on a team's individual backlog for them to kind of determine when they work on it. It's all driven out of this central program, which gives us a little more control, but also allows us to be more open and transparent with what our process is, how teams prioritize and action these issues when we're having conversations with customers, whether good conversations or bad conversations. Being able to provide that transparency has come a long way in regaining customer trust from where things were quite a few years ago, where, as I said, customers would raise issues, we would say, thanks, got it, and then that would be the end. Or we would promise that, yep, we'll get back, we'll fix those, and nothing would happen. Now, by bringing in things like central accessibility backlog and putting in some proper process in place, it just makes it much easier to be able to communicate with customers in a transparent and open way what our QA process is, how teams prioritize, what goals we have for this work, which is reflected on our public roadmap and things like that. So that's one example of bringing something that was really distributed and hard to keep track of from a central location, and then saying, okay, we need to treat these issues different. We can't just lump them in with everything else. And we need a certain level of control so they're getting the attention that they need, the quality that they deserve, and ensuring that they're actionable for folks to be able to produce, reasonable fixes with that would impact the experience and therefore allow us to meet our bar for compliance and conformance.
I can piggyback off that.
I thought it was a good example.
We had a similar process. So like I mentioned before, I was originally chucking all of these issues that I found. I'd go through the ABC News website, for example, and I'd find an issue and I'd chuck it into the backlog for the news team to work on, thinking and hoping that they would just pick them up and work on them. And they said that they would. They said they'd pick up, one or two every now and again, and they just didn't. They just had other priorities. What has worked really well, though, through good relationships with the product team and the product manager, the product manager, we also now have a delivery manager specifically assigned to the ABC News team. And this has been very helpful because they ask me which issues are most important. They ask me to help them decide which issues to focus on. And we have a refinement session for those issues and anything that they choose to look at. Now, it doesn't mean that those issues are going to be picked up in the next sprint or the sprint after or even any sprint anytime soon. But it means that when we have those estimation refinement sessions, that we talk about the issue. What is the issue? Who does it impact? Who needs to fix it? Is it a design responsibility? Is it an engineering responsibility? Is it a bit of both? How long is it going to take? How much work is going to be required to fix this? And then they can jot down some story points in Jira for how much effort is required to do this. And then they can put it back into the backlog or put it into some sprint or some bucket so that understanding what's going to be required, who needs to be involved, they've estimated it properly and they can assign it to a sprint. Now that process has worked really well and we are smashing our way through this backlog of issues. Yeah.
What about yourself, Mel?
This will be a throwback for you, Gerry. It relates to ICT procurement. One thing we realised that wasn't working was because we've got such a small team. Initially, we were having an accessibility SME go into all of the RFPs when we were looking at software solutions and grading them and going through their VPATs and their ACRs And that takes a really long time. And you can imagine how many products Coles is procuring year on year, and it just wasn't working because it wasn't scalable for a team of our size, and it wasn't really the best use of our time. So we had to really be resourceful and figure out what we could do, and then we put in place some things like risk appetites, to risk matrix to check, you know, how much of a risk was this particular product, and how much effort do we need to put into that, and are there some streamlining kind of processes that we can put in to speed things up, to speed up efficiency. So that, was an example of things that, a process that wasn't really working for us, and then we had to like rally and be resourceful and come up with how we could still maintain our standards, but with the resources that we had, the limited resources we had.
Yeah, and I think that's always a challenge for every organization. You've got to make pragmatic prioritization decisions about where you're going to focus. Because I remember, Mel, you and I had a chat many years back, and it was like, I think at the time, Coles had 2,000 digital assets. Yeah. And it's like, how do you progress improvement across 2,000 digital assets? And you've got to make those very, unfortunately, sometimes very pragmatic decisions. I think this comes back to some of what Jennison was mentioning earlier today, at the start of today, which was sometimes we just got to be pragmatic, and sometimes we just got to show progress and figure out what's going to create the biggest impact within your organization, and then hopefully that creates the biggest impact for customers that you each have. So that's fascinating. And I think there's something that I don't think we've touched on, which I'm curious about. So I'm going to throw this to the three of you in general as well, which is like, as we know, all we have to do is tell people that we're going to make things accessible, and everyone leaps to attention, don't they? I mean, there's never any, I guess, resistance you encounter within your organizations. But just in case there is there an example of some resistance that you might have experienced and how you navigated that resistance within your organization, or some experience you've had from that perspective? Does someone have an interesting example of that we could talk through?
I don't understand why there'd be a problem like that. I mean, we all know that accessibility can be very easily tested with an automated tool that will pick up everything you need to know about. So I don't get the problem.
Single line of code on the website solves everything, doesn't it? But in all seriousness, like within the teams, like we know, and we've spoken about this a lot through today, a lot of this comes down to people. It's a cultural situation that we're dealing with within organizations. And I know, in all reality, there is resistance in organizations. We hear it all the time, like, oh, how many people is this really going to affect? Do we really need to do this? I mean, who would, or what area, if you're willing to share, like what's probably been one of those biggest resistance areas you've encountered within your organizations? And what were maybe some of the approaches you took to try to sway and navigate that resistance and bring them to the light of accessibility? Any thoughts or examples?
Oh,
too many. No.
Yeah, I've got one.
Jump in, Gerry.
So, what is the ABC? What does the ABC, at the end of the day, what does the ABC deliver to audiences? It delivers news and media, video, audio content, right? I mean, it's what's on iView, what people listen to through podcasts, what they read on the web. Now we can write really great, accessible news, and I'm so proud of the ABC News team and what they write, how they deliver it. Video can be another story. So the Broadcast Act, which we work to comply to, and we do a pretty good job, says that we need to caption all content that's published on ABC TV main channel between 6 a.m. and midnight, 7 days a week. Is that everything? What happens when that content goes to multi-channel? Say iView. Well, there's no legal requirement for that to be captioned. The Broadcast Act doesn't cover what we publish on the web. Do we have to do it? Is there a mandate that we need to do it? No, there isn't. we try and do as much as we can. So content that is broadcast with captions on the main channel, it goes to ABC iView and is available with captions. But if content that is published on, say, ABC Kids or one of the different multi-channels that we have is not captioned, we're not required to caption it. And when we ask, even if there's been a complaint, when we ask, can we start captioning this show? The response that we typically get is, look, we'd love to do it. We don't have the resources, sorry. We do what we can. We've got limited money, limited budget, and we caption what we can. So, and that's the pushback that we constantly get. How do we go about getting around this? Honestly, I don't think we do a great job. What I'd really like to see is that as soon as video is published anywhere, that captioning it should be captioned all the time. The more noise we hear about this, the more likely change is going to happen. Does that answer the question? This is...
Well, no, but it's a valid point. Like, one of the resistance is you've got an area where it's financially substantial investment.
Look, it's
to meet some of that requirement, and that is a legitimate resistance model that many organizations have to navigate.
What I hope is that in time, we've talked about AI today and the advances that are happening with AI. If anyone has read automatically generated captions, you'll understand, I hope, that they're a lot better than they were a few years back. They're definitely improving, and I'm hoping that the production costs will reduce, which means that we won't need the production and release of captions for all ABC video will just happen because the cost won't be so prohibitive for the organisation, that we will be able to do that. Yeah, so that's one of the biggest issues that we're facing right now.
I've got something.
No.
We're always going to have resistance and we're always going to have reluctance. Like, it's kind of known, and everyone, if you're new to accessibility, expect it. So if I could go back in time, I think the biggest lesson for me has been be proactive, talk about it, sell the hype. So when you're in the room with the pushback and the challenges, then you've already talked to them, you've already primed them, they're already aware of what you do and the value, and tying it to their business objectives. So they know about it. So it's going to be less of a push and less of a struggle if they're familiar with you, familiar with what your mission is. You know what I mean? Yeah.
For me, it comes down to finding the thing that resonates with that person that's giving the pushback to get them to do what they need to do. And that's not the same for everybody. What's important to an engineer to convince them to fix bugs is different to what pushback we would receive from leadership around whether accessibility fits into a business case or not. You've got to find the thing that's important for that person. And if we take the engineers as an example that just don't want to do the work because, of comments like, I didn't know blind people use computers or things like that, which has happened. You've got to let them know about the impact that they can make at like a human level. You could push out this one small fix, which could change the experience for someone entirely. That's not something everybody gets in their job, but you have the power to do that. And so you should lean into that and not consider accessibility as something that's like this extra lift and it's a real pain in the neck, but rather something that you can make impact at a level that people that aren't working on accessibility can't. And so finding a thing that kind of resonates with them, that shifts their perspective on it, I think is a way to move forward when you meet this resistance.
Or appeal to their ego.
Yeah, as well. That will work as well.
And I think that's an important one. It's like it's meet people where they're at. And I think we've heard a bit of that through today as well. It's like if you're meeting people where they're at and recognizing everyone is different, which I think is a very important concept for us to remember, that you can then tailor your approach to that audience that's there. And it's sometimes I think as a community we forget that we think the audience is uniform. It's the same style audience, same style approach we take. Whereas what we have to remember is that society is just as diverse as the disability community, and it's hugely diverse. And we've got to be able to adapt ourselves to that community to hopefully get the message across and promote and sell and hopefully get the best chance of buy-in. And that's ultimately what we're trying to aim for. Now we've got the 5-minute wrap up. So what I want to do is I want to give everyone one takeaway advice you would give to anyone who's trying to scale up accessibility across their organization. What would be that one sort of piece of advice you think would be really helpful for someone who's really starting that journey? I'm going to use that word again, journey, because it is, from my perspective, it's like we all start a journey at different points. And the journey is long for us in this space. But if we're starting that journey in organization, from your experiences, what would be one piece of advice you'd give someone today at the beginning of their individual journey? So Mel, I might start with you, or shall I shuffle?
No, it's okay.
I'll start with you, Mel.
Yeah. Can you say the question just the last bit?
What would be one piece of advice you would give to someone who's starting this journey of scaling accessibility within their organization?
And there, it's just at the beginning of the journey.
And they're at the beginning of the journey.
Yeah. I think depending on what industry you're in and what organisation you work for, look at your organisation's vision, purpose and strategy, and then see how you can tie in accessibility, inclusive design into that, and then speak and keep talking and keep having conversations and speak to your leaders and get your leaders to speak to their leaders. Because once you have that support from the leadership, and then that filters right down, and then everybody knows and all of the things align. So what the business needs what was I saying? And the accessibility mission aligns perfectly, and it just makes common sense.
Yeah, so line up with those business objectives, the strategies for the organization. Everyone has this in every organization. We've got these top strategies. So let's make sure we align all the accessibility requirements to those critical strategies across the organization. Fantastic. Matthew, what about yourself?
Start small. People always make the mistake of trying to go too big, too wide, too early, and it fails. Start small, prove it out, then work out how you scale from there. If you get the traction early on and know that it's going to work, scaling is just another challenge of how you make it bigger. But oftentimes people will start way too big and too wide, and it will just come too hard to maintain and manage. And then before you know it, you're back at square one. You've got to start again. So start small, prove it out, and then ramp up from there.
So you're almost taking the startup mantra, fail fast, conceptually to rolling out an accessibility program, which is, I think, also important. Like, as each of you touched on, there's the trial and errors. Different things are going to work for each organization. So start small. If it's not working, fail it fast, try something new, try to get that traction in place within an organization. Fantastic. Gerry, what about yourself?
Oh, look, Mel suggested aligning the activity with corporate goals, and I couldn't agree with that more. It's something we very much try and do in our day-to-day. But the one, if I was to suggest one thing, it would be shift as far left as you can. If you're still thinking about accessibility as an engineering problem, you need to rethink. It's not. At the end of the day, if we can think about accessibility as a design opportunity, then we're in a great place. Because if we have accessibility as a design opportunity, then we get to work closely with designers to get that design looking and working and functioning how we want. The rest of it is just about how we realize that by giving our engineers what they need to do to realize what the designer has already created in the pattern. And then by doing that, we also give testers a very clear and finite framework that they need to test. You just need to test against what we've written for the design, what we've prepared with the designers. So accessibility is a design opportunity. Yeah.
And that's a fantastic closer, Gerry, because I think at times we find we're chasing things with accessibility. And when we're getting at that final state, the engineering, the testing stage, we're really chasing our tails at that point. Whereas if we can get that early, the impact we can get from that, like particularly like a design system, we improve the design system as just that starting point. The flow on impact that has may not be 100% perfect, but the flow on impact that's going to have across an organization is exponential. And it's a really great point, Gerry, about, let's try to get in early as possible. We always know that it's going to make it cheaper for implementing accessibility across an organization, but it just makes the effort level just reduces as well. And we know as we've also heard, we have limited time, we have limited sort of ability to sort of chase everything down. So if we can get it earlier in the piece, it means that those areas we do have to chase, there's less of them. So that's a fantastic closer, Gerry.
Stuart, I don't know whether we have time, but just on exactly what you mentioned, you're right. It is so much more efficient and cost effective to think about design early. Best example I can think of is a very, very recent one. I don't know if anyone here has visited the Deep Time website. It launched on Monday, I think, or maybe it was very, very recently actually, and it explores 60,000 years of Aboriginal history in Australia. Fascinating website. This was one of the first experiences that we had working closely with designers to develop a very rich storytelling experience, highly interactive from the ground up. We worked with the designers and then the developers all the way through the process. The result is, I think we had we've had lots and lots of feedback. We had more than 1 million people use the website in the first days after it was released. Deep Time. Go and have a look. Have I spooked it enough?
That's okay. I don't know. What was it again, Gerry? Deep Time?
Deep Time, DEEPTIME. We've had very, very, very little accessibility feedback, or I should say, feedback from people with a disability who have had trouble using the experience. And I credit that to the fact that we have teams that are engaged, that want to make it as an inclusive experience, and that they got the right information to start with to make it an inclusive experience. Think about accessibility as a design opportunity, because if we hadn't done that, I guarantee you we'd be writing JIRA tickets. They'd be going into the JIRA system with all kinds of issues that will probably never see the light of day. We didn't get that this time.
So, Gerry, thank you for that, for plugging Deep Time, JIRA. I'm sure the Atlassian team are really happy with you at the moment. They can shout your drinks in a little bit. I would like to thank immensely Mel, Matt, and Gerry for coming up here and sharing their experiences. We know how much we love organizations to share, but we also know how sometimes there's trepidation and fear from an organization to share their experience around accessibility, because everyone trips up and we're all fearful of sticking the head up and having it sort of hit or chopped off. But for us in this room, we also know how important it is. We need to learn off of each other, and we need to learn from the successes and sometimes those mistakes, so that we collectively can get better at doing this. And as we've touched on here, not every method and not every approach is going to work exactly for every organization. So the more examples we've got to work with, hopefully the better chance we're all armed with approaching our individual organizations to try to make them better. So thank you very much, all three of you, for your time today. And thank you everyone here today for taking the time to listen to us right at the end.
AliCamp, celebrating 10 years.